Hey everyone, welcome back for some more Standard here on MTG Arena. It's been a little while since I've played Standard, and that's because I was waiting for the bans. I didn't want to keep playing in a stale meta, so I was waiting for the November 10th ban announcements, and now that that has happened, I am back to playing Standard. And I am returning to a personal favorite. This is now the third Dimir Midrange deck tech that I have featured on my channel. And really, this deck is insanely strong right now. It is potentially the top deck in the meta, and these results just speak for themselves. Look at this absolutely crazy record. This is completely real. This is my actual untapped GG profile, and these are all best of 3 matches. Now, there are a few caveats here. As I said, I have not played much Standard. In fact, I've barely played on the Arena Ranked ladder at all this season so far. So these games that I've been playing have mostly been in Platinum. So you can take that as you will. You know, maybe if I was playing in High Mythic, then my win rate would not be as high. I personally think that it is absurd that Wizards did not ban a single card from this archetype. I am glad that Vivi is gone. That was long overdue, and I am at least satisfied with the 3 cards that they did choose to ban. But really, I wanted to see a few more cards get the hammer, including something from this list. But as it is, pretty much everything in this list is still intact. And my build that you're looking at right now, you might be noticing, is quite different from others that you will see. It's different from the ones that you will see on MTG decks. It is different from ones that you will see in other people's videos. And I fully stand by this, that I think many people are building Dimir Midrange incorrectly. This is an archetype that I am very familiar with. I've been playing with it for several months, and I've tried the other builds. I've tried tons of variations of my own builds, and this is just the one that feels like it works the best right now. So let me start discussing the specifics of the build, and I'm not going to go through it in quite as much detail as I have in my other videos because some aspects of it are similar to those. So if you are curious to hearing more thoughts about my approach to Dimir Midrange and how to play this deck, then I would highly recommend that you go watch one of my previous videos on the deck. Let's get into this. So of course, there's 4 copies of Spyglass Siren. I mentioned this in my last Dimir Midrange video, which is why is Spyglass Siren the perfect 1-drop for this deck? Well, it's a 1/1 flyer, and flying is really important because not only is it evasive and it can get in for damage, but it allows you to ninjutsu in Kaito if the creature is unblocked, and flyers are typically unblocked. So you can play this. It has an ETB effect in the by creating a map token. It has flying, so it might not be blocked. So then you can ninjutsu Kaito, and then when you replay it, you get another map token. It is just excellent. It is such good card synergy between the Siren and the Kaito. Not only that, the map token is very important utility because it allows you to potentially find a land, or it allows you to potentially buff a creature. Those little pieces of advantage are really important for tempo decks like this. 2 copies of Cecil. This guy is, for one thing, a phenomenal blocker, having Death Touch, and is very hard to kill as a 1-drop with the 3 toughness. And it's another creature that might be unblocked for you to ninjutsu in Kaito. And obviously there's a little bit of flexibility here with being able to potentially flip him into the lifelinker. But of course you do need to be careful with that because you can potentially lower your life total. And with some of these aggressive decks still in the meta, that could potentially be to your detriment. Moving on to a personal favorite card of mine, I have talked about Fairy Dream Thief so much in my previous videos. This card is so overlooked. This card is so freaking good, and nobody is playing it. And when Lorwyn comes out and there's all these fairies and all this stuff, more people are probably going to finally give this card the attention it deserves. Before the release of Edge of Eternities and rotation happened, I actually ran 4 copies of Fairy Dream Thief. But with the shift in the meta since then and needing to be slightly more defensive, I found that the 2 copies of Cecil did prove to be more valuable than the 4 copies of Dream Thief. But this card is so freaking good. When it enters, you get to surveil, so it's very similar to a map token. You get to see what's on top of your deck. And then if it goes in the graveyard, you can exile it from your graveyard and draw a card off it. There's so much value here, and it's a 1/1 flyer for 1 mana, same thing as Siren. You can use it to ninjutsu and Kaito, and then when it enters the battlefield again, when you replay it, you get to surveil again. And not only that, there's so much utility here with the surveilling. You can use it to surveil before you draw a card off of Enduring Curiosity. You can use it to surveil before you crack your map token with Siren. So before you crack your map token, look and see what you're about to get. Are you about to get a land that you want? Are you about to get a non-land? Do you want to keep that non-land to buff one of your creatures, or do you want to try to get rid of it to get one of your land? There's so much value here from this Dream Thief. And not only that, if you happen to play this and then you surveil another Dream Thief off the top, just put that Dream Thief in the graveyard, and then you can still exile it and draw a card off of that one that you just put in the graveyard. There's so much value provided by this Dream Thief. Not only if you block with it, you can chump block a big flyer, and then you can still draw a card off it later. There is so much value from this Dream Thief, especially with Agatha's Soul Cauldron being out of the meta right now. It's very unlikely to be exiled because this is like your only graveyard play. You're not going to have people sideboarding in graveyard hate just for this one card. To this day, nobody is playing it, and I think that's crazy. I think that this card could even fit in some other decks aside from Dimir Midrange. Moving on to the 2-drops. This is where my deck is slightly different from other builds. I now have 4 copies of Floodpit's Drowner, whereas I used to only have 2. And I also used to have 2 copies of Plume-Creed Escort. I have now taken those out and replaced them with the 2 copies of Floodpit's Drowner. The reason why I didn't have 4 copies of Floodpit's Drowner for a while is because Floodpit's Drowner doesn't have flying. People are undervaluing the flying. It is so important. That's how this deck wins. You get in for chip damage, and then you're able to ninjutsu and Kaito with a flyer and then hit for a chunk of damage and then get tons of value off of all of his abilities. And the fact that Floodpit's Drowner didn't have flying, it meant that I wasn't always able to get in for that 2 damage. So that's why I was running the Plume Creeds for the flying, but then also to protect my creatures, right? Because Plume Creed gives a creature hexproof. However, with the way the meta is now, the meta is much less interactive. It is not necessary to protect your creatures with hexproof. Yes, some of your creatures are going to die, like your Deep Cavern Bats or your Tide Binders or your Curiosities or whatever, but the meta is, generally speaking, much less interactive. It is not as necessary to hold up a protection creature for one of your other creatures. Moreover, because there's a lack of interaction in Standard right now, unfortunately, I personally prefer Standard metas that are much more interactive, but right now that's not really the case. It gives room for Dimir Midrange to be the highly interactive deck, and Floodpit's Drowner is, of course, interactive. So this is why I have added 2 copies of Floodpit's Drowner. It really slows down a lot of decks, and it can also just clear the way, right? It can clear the way by tapping something down before your combat phase, and now you can get it for more damage. I still have Malcolm in here, but I used to have 2 copies. Now I only have 1. I trimmed a copy of Malcolm so that I can make room for a 4th copy of Deep Cavern Bat. I'll talk more about this creature in a minute. Malcolm is a really good creature. This is another one that so many people are overlooking. This guy allows you to loot through your deck a little bit, and if he happens to get up to 4 chorus counters and you get to cast something for free, that is just crazy. But it's another creature with flash. It's a 2/1 flyer. It's a little bit similar to Fairy Mastermind that we had before, but it's not quite as good. But if the meta changes again in the future, I think it's possible that I start running another copy of this again. I'm probably not going to run more than 2 copies because Malcolm is legendary. Let's talk about the bat. This is the first build in which I'm running 4 copies of Deep Cavern Bats. And the reason why I wasn't doing that before is because there's an asymmetry here. There's an asymmetry between Deep Cavern Bats and Kaito. What are you going to do? You're going to ninjutsu in Kaito and take back your bat and then give them back their thing? Like, no, you're not going to do that. So there were these situations in previous builds and previous iterations where I would have the bat and that would be the only creature I had, and I would have a Kaito in my hand and I wouldn't be able to ninjutsu him in. So that's why for a long time I was not running 4 copies of bats. However, that being said, in this meta, with these crazy combo decks, with the Simic Omniscience, the Simic Aggro with the Ouroboros and the Druidess, and the Sultai Reanimators with all that crazy stuff, the Standard is just busted right now. It is so busted, and those bans did not change enough stuff. The meta is still completely busted. Decks are still comboing off like crazy on turn 4, maybe turn 5. They're doing ridiculous things. This bat is so important now. It is so important to take away the key thing in your opponent's hand. Even if all it does is slow them down, even if it means the bat does get removed, it at least gives you a little bit of time. This creature is so important. So that's why I'm running 4 copies of the bat now. Let's talk about the 3-drop slot where there's only one creature here, Tidebinder. Tidebinder, again, is so important in this meta. It counters every one of these crazy triggered abilities. So it is so important for Dimir Midrange to take a highly interactive approach right now. With the Flood Pitch Drowners and the Tidebinders, right? You absolutely need to be main decking 2 copies of Tidebinder. I've seen other lists that run 3 copies of Tidebinder. I think there is an argument to be made to do something like that. But I'm personally running 2 copies because, yes, Tidebinder is really good interaction, but it's very easy to remove. Right? It's only got 2 toughness. So if you counter an opponent's thing, great, but then the next turn they remove it, it's like, how much value did you really get from it, right? Now let's go to the good stuff. This is the biggest difference between my deck and every single other Dimir Midrange deck list out there. So I'm the crazy one, and I'm going to talk about why I only have 3 copies of Enduring Curiosity and 4 copies of Kaito. So I actually think that Enduring Curiosity is the best card in this deck. And I think Enduring Curiosity should have been banned. Again, I think it's crazy that Wizards did not do that. However, even though Enduring Curiosity is so good, this happens on turn 4. Think about the other turn 4 plays that these other decks are doing. Would you rather cheat in an Omniscience or play a Curiosity? Would you rather reanimate Bringer of the Last Gift or play a Curiosity? Would you rather cast an Ouroboros and buff your massive board that has been widened with Drunith or play a Curiosity? As crazy as it is, Curiosity is not a strong enough turn for play in the current meta. There's just better stuff. You know, Day of Judgment, right? Now, of course, Curiosity gets around Day of Judgment, but you see what I'm saying? Turn 4 is the turning point in all of these matches. What happens? Is the game over? Does the game continue? Does one deck pop off, right? And playing a Curiosity is just, it's not that good. It's crazy to think about. And not only that, if you have multiple Curiosities in your hand, that sucks. First of all, your hand is going to be slow if you have multiple Curiosities in your hand. Second of all, you got to try to get in and do damage. And if your opponent is making this big board or doing all this crazy stuff, you ain't getting in for damage. You might be able to get in for 1 and maybe you draw 2 cards. That's great. But at that point, the game might be over. As good as Curiosity is, and honestly, as good as it is in multiples, because you get to draw many cards, in most games, 1 Curiosity is enough. 1 Curiosity is enough to give you the value that you need, and you don't even need it right away. It can come around turn 5. It can come around turn 6. If the game goes a little bit longer, it comes around turn, that's fine. It is fine to wait a little bit to get this Curiosity. You don't need it immediately. So the problem is that when I was running 4 copies, it was always showing up when I couldn't really get the value from it. There were all these instances where it's like, oh man, I wish that this was like a cheap creature that I could play on turn 1, or I wish that it was a cheap creature I could play on turn 2, or I wish it was a piece of interaction. And not only that, even though there's only 3 in here, it is highly likely you are going to find one of these per game because you have the map tokens with Siren. With the Dream Thieves in here, that's just a little bit more that you get to dig through the deck to potentially find it. You have Malcolm here to help you with that, you know, because there's these other things, right? There's these other things in here to help you look through the deck a little bit. It increases your chances of finding a Curiosity. So really, even though I think this is the best card in the deck, I think it should have been banned. I'm only running 3 copies of it. And instead, I'm running 4 copies of the legendary Planeswalker, Kaito. It sounds crazy. If I'm worried about clogging up my hand with Curiosity, why am I running 4 copies of the legendary Planeswalker that would seemingly clog up my hand even more? It doesn't make any sense. Here's the thing about Dimir Midrange. What is the power play here? If I take, let's pretend Kaito is not in this deck. What is the power play? There isn't one. There literally is no power play here in this deck. It's all this little interactive stuff, right? These things that are annoying, and then you get to draw a bunch of cards. There's nothing here that packs a punch. Kaito is the power play. This is how you win the game. Now, that's not always true. You know, you can win with your flyers, you can win with just tempo, right? And just outpacing your opponent if you keep drawing interaction. That's great. But what I'm saying is that when you need to actually pose a threat, a real threat, not some little cheap 1/1 flyer where your opponent can just take the damage, not just, oh, wow, you drew 3 cards. Okay, I don't care, right? What actually threatens your opponent the most? It's this guy right here, because he's got hexproof. He can get bigger every single turn. He can tap down your opponent's stuff and put stun counters on them so that they can't attack and they can't block. This Planeswalker is so freaking strong. And I think every person who plays Dimir Midrange, because every Dimir Midrange build I see only runs 3, everybody's undervaluing this Planeswalker. And not only that, if you can ninjutsu him on turn 3, I have said this in the past and I'm standing by it right now, ninjutsuing this Planeswalker in on turn 3 is one of the best turn 3 plays you can do in the entire format. I said it months ago and I'm saying it again now. And as you can see, I have structured my deck in a way that facilitates this. I have the 2 Fairy Dream Thieves. I have a Malcolm. All of these creatures right here, these creatures can all be ninjutsued in, or can be enablers to ninjutsu and Kaito on turn 3. The only one that can't is Deep Cavern Bat. Now that being said, I don't always ninjutsu and Kaito on turn 3, but if I have the choice between a Curiosity and a Kaito on turn 4, sometimes I choose Kaito just so that I can use the stun. The stun is honestly the most important ability with this Planeswalker. It is not the 0 ability. Not only do I see so many Dimir Midrange builds that only run 3 copies of Kaito, at this point, going back to when Dimir Midrange first started to become popular last year, right? Not even necessarily over the summer when it got a little bit revived. That was kind of like phase 2, right? Dimir Midrange, and now we're kind of in phase 3. But I have probably watched over 100 Dimir Midrange games at this point. And almost all the time, everybody's just using the 0 ability, just using the 0. It's like everybody forgets that you can do the other stuff. People are not understanding the power of the plus up and the -2, the stun. That's what gets you closer to winning. That is your power play. Because if you keep buffing him up every single turn, for one thing, it makes him hit for more damage, right? But it also makes your Soulstone Sanctuary hit for more damage as well. And if I've plussed up my Kaito twice and my opponent hasn't, and now we're both activating our Sanctuaries, guess what Sanctuary comes out on top? Mine. In all seriousness, I know I'm getting a little bit unhinged here, but truthfully, so many people are undervaluing this Planeswalker, and so many people I don't think are using him to his maximum potential. You don't want to just surveil and draw a card every single time. Yes, that's great. Yes, that's great value, but it doesn't get you closer to closing the game. If you had stunned your opponent's creature, you might have won a turn sooner, or you might have been able to stop them from killing you, or you might have just gotten the job done sooner than if you had just kept drawing cards and procrastinating. Save the surveilling for when you really need it. You need to find a land, right? Or you definitely need to find a piece of interaction. Or if you just have very few cards in your hand, right? You want to get some more stuff. I know I sound crazy. I know I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, but for one thing, you're going to see it in the gameplay. You're going to see me use this Planeswalker. You're going to see me use the stuns, and you're going to see the value that it gives. Again, Dimir Midrange needs to take an interactive approach. Curiosity is great. Curiosity is really powerful, but Curiosity is not interactive. Kaito is interactive. Not only are you tapping down a creature, you're putting 2 stun counters on it. So that is 2 turns that creature effectively doesn't do anything. So let me just catch my breath a little bit. The interaction is here. This is what you would expect, right? The 2 copies of Phantom Interference, 2 Bitter Triumphs, 2 Shoot the Sheriffs. All of this makes sense. I am also running 2 copies of Tragic Trajectory. Actually works really well in this deck. I was kind of undervaluing it for a little while, but because look, if you don't trigger Void, this thing is just sorcery speed -2/-2, which is trash, right? Well, the thing is, it's not that hard to trigger Void. You got map tokens, right? You got these map tokens, and you could potentially just, it's always tempting to like activate the map token as soon as you can, as soon as like a turn 3, if you don't have Kaito, activate the map token, play a 2-drop. But sometimes you want to save that map token because you might have a Tragic Trajectory in your hand, or you might want to wait to see if you do get one, right? The map token triggers Void, and not only that, so does Kaito, right? If you ninjutsu in Kaito, then that triggers Tragic Trajectory. Plus, look, Dimir Midrange is a highly interactive deck. So if you remove something, that also triggers Void, right? Or if you attack your creatures and you remove something on the opponent's side. Well, granted, these creatures are kind of weak, but if Cecil blocks something and it dries, right, all this stuff, there are fairly reliable ways to trigger Void with this thing. And also, there are a lot of small creatures being played in the meta right now. So it is unfortunate that sorcery speed, that's another thing with the standard meta right now, man, and it has been a problem for a while. The interaction just isn't that good. The interaction is not that good. Our instants are not that good outside of Azorius control, right? But we are getting Heartless Act, right? So that's one piece of interaction that could be potentially good. It won't work very well against the Simic decks that are running Ouroboros, but hopefully the interaction gets a little bit better with the next couple of sets. And lastly, one copy of Strategic Betrayal. This card is so necessary right now. It's not just Sultai Reanimator. There's Orzhov Aristocrats. There's Yuna. There's a lot of decks that use the graveyard in some capacity. Insidious Roots is still a thing. So this Strategic Betrayal is so necessary to main deck if you are running black. The lands have gotten slightly better with the addition of Multiversal Passage, but otherwise it's mostly unchanged. The Gloom makes the 2 Reefs, the 4 Water Graves, right? This is basically what I had in all my other builds, the 2 Soul Stones, but the Multiversal Passages really do make a difference. You don't have to run quite as many basics, and then you can choose which color you need, and it also turns on the Verge. Sideboard definitely looks different from previous iterations. Still having a null in here. This is absolutely necessary. There's all these pixie decks doing the bounce thing with the enchantments. There's still Jeskai artifacts or Azorius artifacts or even Izzet artifacts, right? All those things. 2 copies of Spell Pierce and a copy of Negates. Again, really good against artifact decks, but obviously more importantly, good against control decks. Essence Scatter, I think this is a no-brainer. So many creature decks in the current meta, whether they be aggro decks or combo decks, whatever, you need a copy of Essence Scatter in the sideboard. And to that end, I'm also playing a copy of Spectral Interference. This is a counterspell that nobody's paying attention to. And I don't know why. Look at this counterspell. Counter target artifact or creature unless its controller pays 4. How often is an opponent going to be able to pay 4? This is a really good counterspell that everybody is overlooking. And it's not just creatures, it is artifacts as well. So it kind of works as a copy of a null, but then it also works as a copy of Essence Scatter. It's just 2 mana instead of 1. I think more people need to be either playing this counterspell or sideboarding it. A copy of Fabulum Trick. This is mostly for the mirror match. Fabulum Trick doesn't work that well against aggressive decks because yes, you might be able to tap down an opponent's stuff, but you only get these 1/1 flyers. Especially if your opponent has trample, those 1/1 flyers aren't really going to do anything, right? But this is very good in the mirror match because then you get to tap something down and then you have 1/1 flyers that can potentially block your opponent's bats or block your opponent's Flood Pitch Drowners or whatever, maybe a Spyglass Siren if it doesn't have the +1/+1 counter from the map. So Fabulum Trick, very, very good in the mirror. I don't think it's quite main deck worthy. I was trying it in the main deck and a couple of other builds, but I didn't want that many pieces of interaction because I'm going for a slightly more aggressive build here with the earlier creatures to Ninjutsu and Kaito on turn 3. So this would have been like my 10th piece of interaction, and then I had to sacrifice one of these other creatures. And if not, then I would have to take out one of these pieces of interaction. I didn't want to do that, right? I wanted the 1 mana interaction for Tragic Trajectory. I definitely wanted the Graveyard Hate from the Strategic Betrayal. But that being said, I do think there's room to play a Fabulum Trick in the main deck. 2 copies of Duress for control decks is also good in the mirror match, good against artifact decks, all that stuff. Intimidation Tactics, this is a must-add in your sideboard, potentially your main board, again, for decks that are running black, again, to hit those combo pieces, right? Nowhere to Run, this is mostly for Kona. It's also pretty good against the Simic deck because you can potentially get an Ouroboros before, it gets big, so then you can remove it before the trigger happens, and then your opponent can't cast Hexproof anymore. This is also good in the mirror match because it takes away the Hexproof from Kaito, and it pretty much removes every single creature in this deck. More Graveyard Hate for Strategic Betrayal and Lord Skitter. And then a copy of Karsi Revenant for, again, the mirror match. It's very good against that because it blocks the smaller flyers, but also for more aggressive decks in case you need to gain some more life. Now, a card that's notably absent from here is Preacher of the Schism. Honestly, Preacher is one of my favorite creatures. He always has been since Ixalan, but unfortunately, he's just not that good right now. Tapping up for 3 to just play this 2/4 guy that doesn't really do anything. I mean, he does stuff when he attacks, right? And he's a very good blocker. But now that things have slowed down just a tiny bit, there's a little bit less mono red that's running you over really early on. You don't have these massive creatures in the VV deck that are getting so big, right? So that's where Preacher really provided its value, is that it could block a 7/7 Mako or a 7/8 Fear of Missing Out, right? Or any of this stuff because it has Death Touch, and it was hard to remove because of the 4 toughness. It was very good against mono red as well because it could block pretty much any of those creatures, and it was very hard for mono red to remove because you couldn't lightning strike it. But now that those decks aren't relevant anymore, certainly not as a Cauldron, and mono red isn't played as much, I don't think Preacher provides the same amount of value that he used to. He's slow, and he doesn't have an ETB effect, and more importantly, he doesn't allow you to apply early pressure on your opponent. If I have the choice between Ninjutsuing Kaito on turn 3 or Preacher on turn 3, Ninjutsuing Kaito applies more pressure. Now, one of the cards that's absent from the entire 75 here is Stab. I gotta say, Stab is just not a good card. It's like, Stab is just not a good card. I wish it was, but it's just not. It's not good enough in the current meta, even though it is good against Dimir Midrange because you can remove all these weak little creatures. I just don't think it's worth it. But if you want to potentially cut one of these creatures, like you could cut a Malcolm and play a copy of Stab. You could cut a Tragic Trajectory, play a copy of Stab. You could do it like that. But I personally just don't think Stab provides enough value. So once again, my Dimir midrange build is very different from others. Mine has a lower curve slightly. Mine is more aggressive. It's a little bit low to the ground, even though I guess it's not low to the ground at all with so many flyers, right? It's technically above the ground. No, but it gets in for more damage early on, it applies more early pressure, and it really tries to facilitate Kaito. That's the power play in this deck. So it's very different, but again, you're going to see it in the gameplay. You're going to see me use Kaito to great effect, and I think people are just not utilizing him correctly. Use these other abilities. Don't just always surveil and draw a card. So I've got a real treat for you. These 3 matches that you're going to see are incredibly entertaining. And really, a couple of these games are some of the nuttiest games that I have ever played with Dimir Midrange. So let's move on to showcasing this deck in action. I'm sure you're all going to enjoy. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the first match. This looks pretty good. Hopefully I can find a 3rd land to really keep things going. Obviously, Spyglass Siren can help me with that. My opponent starts with a Breeding Pool. So it could be Simic Aggro. It could be Simic Kona. So that's why I'm just taking a second here to figure out if I want to start with Spyglass Siren or Cecil. Against some more aggressive decks, Cecil might be better because he's a better blocker. But Spyglass Siren's also good for getting in the air and, again, making sure that I can thin my deck a little bit with the map token, although I did get my 3rd land off the top anyway. My opponent plays a Blooming Marsh and an Overlord of the Belmerk. So what does that mean? Sultai Reanimator, this absolutely busted deck with Superior Spider-Man, aka Cavero, in Through the Omen pads. So I'm in for a wild ride here, man. I'm gonna try to figure out what to do about this. Now, they didn't actually get anything out of the graveyard with the Overlord, right? It was a whiff. There was just some lands. There was a Awaken the Undead in there. So the reason why I'm cracking the map token here is because A, I do want to see what's on top of my library, but also B, if it's a non-land, which it is, then Spyglass Siren gets a little bit stronger. I hit for more damage, and then I can still play Cecil to get in for 2 damage, right? The alternative would have been to do Floodpit Drowner for a similar thing, because Floodpit Drowner doesn't really do that much against Sultai Reanimator. It's just a way to get in for more damage. But it's literally 1 more point of damage by putting the map token there on Spyglass Siren. Unfortunately, my opponent has another Awaken the Undead, so there goes that. But I am thinking of Ninjutsuing Kaito here because just got to get in for damage, right? And I don't have anything in my hand that's going to stop the reanimation from happening right now. So it'd be nice to surveil, draw a card to see if I could potentially find one of those things. But also there's kind of no point in waiting around. I might as well get in for some more damage with Kaito if I don't have a way to respond. So I don't really need that Spyglass Siren. The 4th land is certainly helpful though. There's a Town Greeter, and unfortunately there's an Arden in the graveyard now. So that is absolutely terrifying. They can reanimate the Arden, and then Arden's going to reanimate the Town Greeter. And Town Greeter is going to be a 5/5 demon with lifelink. So this is just really not looking good. There's the Zombify. There's the Arden. Here comes the Town Greeter. This is nuts. This deck is absolutely insane. There's the Town Greeter. Another Awaken the Undead goes in the graveyard, which actually isn't a bad thing. You know, that's kind of the primary removal for this deck. So the more of them that end up in the graveyard, it's kind of a good thing. Now, I do have some options, though. I also drew an untapped land, just a basic land. So I don't even have to shock myself here to get 4 mana. And I have 2 Shoot the Sheriffs. It's actually not bad, right? I can respond to what my opponent has. And there's just a Town Greeter in the graveyard for now. Now, there's a few things with this. If I kill the Arden, it could potentially come back. It can come back with another Zombify. It can come back with a Kavero. And then there's another Town Greeter in the graveyard to be reanimated as well. Not only that, the Chapter 3 of Awaken the Undead is about to happen. So if I kill the Arden can go back to my opponent's hand. So one thing I'm certainly going to do is kill that token. Right, that Town Greeter token. But I am considering killing the Arden as well, but just doing it after the trigger on the Awaken the Undead. So that way my opponent can't get it back by simply discarding and putting it back in their hand, right? They would have to get another reanimation spell of some kind. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. I'm going to wait for this to happen. They didn't do it. Good for me. And now I can actually wait to just before combat to do all this stuff, right? So I'm just checking, right? The text is at the beginning of combat, so I'm good. I can wait a little bit. It's nerve-wracking though, right? Because look, this deck is already popping off and my opponent could potentially have another huge turn here. So there's just a land that goes in the graveyard. And before combat, I'm going to kill the token and I'm going to kill Arden. Now, if they have a way to reanimate him, they have a way to reanimate him, right? But I think I did the best I could. And look at that, they didn't have anything. All right, so I got a little bit fortunate that they didn't have anything there. But the problem is that, yes, there's an Arden in the graveyard, and then there's also a Town Greeter in the graveyard still. So there's still shenanigans that can happen here. So I can at least play Cecil, and then I can hold up either Curiosity or both. Well, I can hold up everything in my hand, right? But I don't have a Tidebinder. There's a Steam Core Scholar, which it's still not so bad, you know, like they're obviously looking for something, which is better than them having it, right? And so now there's a Bringer of the Last Gift in the graveyard, and there's a Kiora coming down. This is just horrible. Look at this. There's an Arden in the graveyard, a Bringer in the graveyard. They just got a Kiora on the field. There's an Overlord coming off of it. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely insane. So the good news is that I can do stuff, right? I'm going to need to tap something and kill something, right? I can get the Curiosity down. And what I'm actually thinking of doing here is killing the Bale Merc because, yes, that is a potential reanimation target, but, you know, wasting a kill spell, I feel like the Kiora is slightly easier for me to remove, right? I can also attack here because I don't care if my opponent blocks, right, with either creature. They're just blocking with the Steam Core Scholar, and I'm going to tap down that Kiora, right? But the main reason why I decided to kill the Bale Merc is that it is slightly harder for me to remove, right? The Kiora at least dies to, like, my Tragic Trajectory if I find that. Just double-checking the text. And now I also found my Tishana's Tidebinder. So this actually isn't horrible, right? I just need to hope that they can't have a massive turn here. So my opponent goes to combat. I need to decide if I'm going to do this Flood Pitch Drowner and give up the potential to cast Tidebinder. I could also potentially cast Tidebinder on Kiora, but I really want to save the Tidebinder for the Kavero, right? The Superior Spider-Man. So I thought, all right, you know what? I got to tap this down because they're going to get the 8/8. They're going to get the 8/8 octopus thing. So I have to take the risk that they don't have something crazy in their hand. It's just a Steam Core Scholar. I'm getting a little bit fortunate here because they've looked through a lot of their deck. They've looked through about half their deck. See, that's what I'm checking. How much of their deck have they looked through? I'm getting a little bit fortunate that they haven't popped off just yet. Fairy Dream Thief is good. because now I can attack into my opponent, but I can surveil first to see what's on top. What am I going to draw off of these curiosity triggers? It's a Bitter Triumph. That's good. I need to kill this Kiora at some point, and I have the Tidebinder for the Cavero when that comes down. So I'm holding on. My opponent's going to Bitter Triumph my Cecil. And block my Drowner. So I only get to draw the Bitter Triumph. Not so bad though. Look, my opponent's got 1 card. I got 3 cards, right? And we have equal life, and I have a slightly better board. So I've managed to finagle this a little bit. There's a Town Greeter. That's fine. There's a Cavero in the graveyard and a Volgavoth and a Smuggler's Surprise. But they have another Cavero. So it's not so bad. I have the Tidebinder in my hand, right? I have the answer to all this. So they target Bringer of the Last Gift. I'm going to play the Tidebinder, and I'm going to counter the Bringer trigger, right? That one right there. And now I can actually attack into this with my Curiosity, because if I don't mind a trade with the Cavero copy, right? So I can attack into this. And I'm considering playing the other Curiosity as well, because I do have a land here. So I can hold up mana for Bitter Triumph. So get in. My opponent is going to block. And I will play the other Curiosity. Draw 2 cards, and then I can Bitter Triumph the Kiora. So actually, this really isn't so bad. And really, I'm actually way ahead now. So despite all that scary stuff going on with the graveyard, I got a little bit lucky that my opponent didn't have a Cavero earlier on before I got the Tidebinder. And I had a Floodpitch Drowner for the Kiora. And I had 2 removal spells for the Arden and the Town Greeter token. Now, my opponent's going to top deck something here. Watch this. Watch what they just top decked. It's a Meringue River Regent. How about that? This is nuts, right? What am I going to do now? I can't attack into this thing, right? So I'm going to bounce my Tidebinder and the... I actually think bouncing the Tidebinder here was a mistake, because now I can use it again, right? I can use it again. So I'm going to at least get rid of this Kiora. And I'm going to discard the Restless Reef, because I don't want to keep filling their graveyard, right? But I really think that bouncing that Tidebinder was actually a slight mistake, because I can replay it, right? I can replay it in the event that my opponent draws another Cavero and tries to play that, or any of these things that it's got. So I think it would have been better for my opponent to potentially bounce like the Fairy Dream Thief and the Curiosity, or maybe just the Curiosity, honestly, instead of bouncing both things, because the Dream Thief would let me surveil again. So I'm actually just going to pass a turn here. I'm going to block with Fairy Dream Thief, and then if Fairy Dream Thief ends up in the graveyard, I can draw a card off it. My opponent's going to attack. I'm going to block the Meringue River Regents. And then I can play Curiosity and draw a card off of the Dream Thief. And they didn't play anything, so that might just be a land in their hand. So I'm going to draw a card off of the Dream Thief. It's just a land for me. But look at that, I found a Kaito. That's actually really good, right? That Kaito really does make a difference, because I can potentially tap something down and swing for lethal at some point. I can also hard cast Kaito here, because I have the mana to do that and hold up Tidebinder. So really, not that bad of options, right? So first I'm going to draw my cards. Let's see what I get. So I got a land and a second Kaito. Honestly, a second Kaito is not bad, because I can use the stun ability on one, and then I can play the other one and use the stun ability again. So I have a lot of stun potential in my hand. So that's why I played this copy of Kaito, was to stun the Meringue River Regent. That felt like the best thing to do, to just buy some time, and then hold up Tidebinder. Right? Because again, if they reanimate something, I need to have some answer to it. So now watch this. Watch what happens now. After all this crazy stuff, watch what happens now. They're looking in the graveyard. Zombify on Volgavoth. Zombify on Volgavoth, man. Isn't that nuts? That is nuts. So, I'm pausing for a second though, because I'm thinking, I actually might still be able to do this. Because if I play Tidebinder right now, if I can tap down both creatures, then I actually win the game. I can swing for lethal. So what I can do is play Tidebinder. I can tap down the Town Greeter with my old Kaito, the Kaito that's on the field right now. I can play the new Kaito and the Deep Cavern Bat, tap down the Volgavoth, sack that Kaito, sack the Bat, and sack the Curiosity. That's just an enchantment. And I'll swing for lethal. So that's what I'm planning in my head right now. I'm like, wait a minute, can I actually do this? Like if I do this, if I do that, and I can do it. I can play Tidebinder, use the existing Kaito to tap down the Town Greeter. That Kaito will die. And then play the new Kaito and the Bat to tap down the Volgavoth. That's what I'm going to do. Tap down the Town Greeter. And then I need to play the Bat first. I almost made that mistake here. So checking myself. Oh, I guess it didn't matter as long as I waited to do the stun. And it's a Bringer of the Last Gift in their hand anyway. But now I'm going to play my second Kaito and tap down the Volgavoth. And then I'm going to sack the Bat, the Kaito, and the Curiosity enchantment. And then swing for lethal. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane game one. That was just nuts. And I'm telling you, Kaito is ridiculously strong. I would not have won that game. I would not have won that game if I didn't have those two Kaitos in my hand. I needed them both. It's just nuts. This guy is the powerhouse of this deck. He is so important. He does so much stuff. So now I need to figure out what to do. Normally, what I do when I'm on the draw is cut one of the Kaitos. But in this situation, I'm actually considering not doing that because he can potentially speed things up to get the game over faster, which is something that you want to do against the Sultai Reanimator deck. You want to try to go fast. The other things that I'm considering here is, of course, Strategic Betrayal, Lord Skitter, right? And then the creature counter spells like Spectral Interference and Essence Scatter. Now, here's the thing. This is a little bit embarrassing, but I actually had to go use the bathroom. So I got up to go use the bathroom, and I almost didn't make it back in time to sideboard. So you can see I'm under 30 seconds here. I still didn't get back yet, right? Now I get to 20 seconds and I'm finally back, right? I'm moving my mouse. I'm like, okay, let me put in the intimidation tactics, right? Let me put in the skitter. I was really nervous when I saw how little time I had to sideboard, but whatever. Sometimes it happens, right? I decided to take out the Bitter Triumph, just focus on Graveyard Hate. I put in the Annul for the Awaken the Honored Dead and the Baelmerk, and then I tried to hit done in time, right? It was pretty close though, right? I only had 1 second left, so we got to see. We got to see if I did it in time or not. Here's my opening hand for the second game. This actually looks pretty good. I can start with a Dream Thief and try to find that third land I need. I have Strategic Betrayal in my opening hand and a Deep Cavern Bat. So you can see how I drew the Bitter Triumph off the top. I tried to sideboard the Bitter Triumphs out, right? So unfortunately, I did take too long to sideboard, so I'm just playing with my main deck right now. That being said, I got a little bit fortunate that my one copy of Strategic Betrayal in my main deck is in my opening hand. So at least I wasn't too punished for it. My opponent finds an Arden in the graveyard. And I'm going to start with the bat here, see what my opponent's got going on. And this hand is absolutely loaded. So the good news is that they only have one more land. And I'm considering taking that Steam Core Scholar because I don't want them to find more land. And also Steam Core Scholar is their discard outlet right now, right? So that's their ticket to be able to discard the Bringer of the Last Gift or the Arden into the graveyard. So if I take that away, they seemingly have to wait for Meringue River Region to do that. They're going to play Stab on my Deep Cavern Bat. And then they didn't have black mana to cast the second Overlord, but now they do have their discard outlet, and I did not get a third land, right? So I do still have an option to play the Phantom Interference, which I'm considering doing on the Steam Core Scholar. The other thing that I'm considering is waiting for the Steam Core Scholar to just come down and then using Strategic Betrayal on it, because whatever they decide to put in the graveyard will just be exiled. So that's another thing that I'm considering. My opponent shocks in the Watery Grave and decides to play the Steam Core Scholar, so I'm a little bit surprised at that they... I mean, maybe they're looking to see if they find a stab or something, but I think in that situation, you play the Steam Core Scholar first, and then you decide if you're going to shock it or not, shock in the land or not. So they put the Bringer of the Last Gift in the graveyard. I'm going to play a Malcolm, and then I'm going to use the Strategic Betrayal to exile the Scholar and my opponent's graveyard. So there it all goes. And then I'm going to draw and discard with Malcolm. I do a third Floodpitch Drowner, so I can certainly get rid of one of these things. And then I can play a land. So no reanimation here. They seemingly need to use the Coil and Catch to try and do something with it. With them shocking that land in, I figured that they would play the Bale Merc. And they did. So I can either kill it with Bitter Triumph, or I can tap it down with Floodpitch Drowner. And I drew a fourth land, so that's even better. So now I have... I can just hold up everything in my hand, right? I don't even need to necessarily play anything yet. Get in for damage. I drew another land, which actually isn't so bad. I can just discard this island. Looking in the graveyard, there's nothing scary in there right now. So I'm actually expecting that my opponent's going to hard cast the Meringue River Regent. They didn't do it this turn because they played a Sewer as a tapped land. But I'm going to save the Phantom Interference for that, because that's kind of what I'm expecting that they're going to do. They play an Awakened Honor Dead. A little bit unfortunate, because it would be nice to keep... Seemingly they're going to target Malcolm here, and it would be nice to keep Malcolm around to get in some more for some more damage. But I can tap down both Overlords with the Floodpitch Drowners and then attack. So that's what I'm considering doing here. I'm going to tap down this Overlord, and then I'm considering tapping down the other Overlord once it's done impending. That's what I'm going to do. Wait for this Overlord to impend and tap it down. And now, if I hold up Phantom Interference, then seemingly I'm going to win the game. Now, I drew a Kaito off the top, which, you know, normally I'd be very happy to see that, but it's pretty much irrelevant at this point. I can just attack. And then, barring anything super crazy, I seemingly have the means to deal with this. Right? There's nothing in the graveyard, so Cavero can't target anything. So they're probably going to play Meringue River Regent, or they're going to play something like a Steam Core Scholar can just kill it with Bitter Triumph, right? So I'm looking pretty set. Nothing scary in the graveyard. There's Meringue River Regent. Counter it. And that's the game. So really, that was just absolutely nuts. That was one of the craziest games I've ever played. That game one with my opponent filling the graveyard and then not getting back in time to be able to sideboard properly, but came away with the win. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the second match. And it doesn't look that great, but it is keepable. This is, again, some of the value that Fairy Dream Thief brings to this build is... I mean, without it, if I was just a Cecil, I probably wouldn't be able to keep this hand. But the Dream Thief does let me surveil. And I could potentially find that third land that I'm going to need. Hopefully it's a blue land, right? But 2 Deep Cavern Bats, a Dream Thief. This is actually pretty good. It's just 2 lands, and it's only, you know, going to be... It's a 1-color land, and then this colorless Soulstone, and then 2 Kaitos. But otherwise, this hand is pretty good. My opponent starts with a Blue Passage and a Siren. So this is absolutely a mirror match. Now, I did draw a Swamp, which is actually really good. So now I have 3 lands, and I can make the passage just blue. You can start with my Dream Thief. There's a Phantom Interference there. This is kind of a tough choice because Dimir Midrange plays a lot of cheap spells. So ironically, you know, one of the key pieces of interaction in this deck is not very good in the mirror match because, you know, it's easy for a Dimir Midrange deck to be able to just pay that too, unless it's during Curiosity, right? Or like a Tidebinder if it's being tapped for 3 and there's not a lot of open mana left. My opponent attacks. Certainly no blocks from me. My opponent plays a land and passes a turn. So of course they could be holding Floodpitch Drowner, Could also be a removal. Both Spyglass Siren and Fairy Dream Thief are not targetable with Shoot the Sheriff. But you wouldn't want to waste a removal spell on Fairy Dream Thief anyway. So it is a Flood Pitch Drowner. That's why I went to combat before playing the bat, because if I had played the bat, then my opponent would have tapped down my bat. So tapping down the Dream Thief is not as bad as tapping down the bat. Also, I wanted to play the Sanctuary instead of the Passage Land, because if I can avoid shocking myself with it, then I want to do that. So I don't necessarily need to shock myself with it yet. So I might be able to play it tap next turn. So that's why I played the Sanctuary instead. Now look at that. My opponent also has 2 Kaitos in their hand. So we're kind of in a similar situation here. And taking the Spyglass Siren, I think, was the better choice because it just expands the board. I can potentially wait to deal with that first Kaito, and that other Kaito in their hand will be a dead card. So I'm obviously in the same situation, but I do think that taking that Spyglass Siren was a better choice, especially with me having 2 flyers. They're going to ninjutsu their Flood Pitch Drowner. This was the right choice. Definitely the right choice to ninjutsu the Flood Pitch Drowner, because tapping down my creatures benefits them. Because, again, they have a flyer, I have 2 flyers, but if you're tapping down my bat, then I can't gain life, or if you're tapping down my Dream Thief, I can't block with it, right, and all these things. So definitely taking the Drowner in this case was the right thing to do, instead of taking the Spyglass Siren to try to get another map token. So as for me, playing my Kaito is not going to do anything. So I can at least attack their Kaito. That somewhat limits what they can potentially do, right? If they're going to tap him down, then I can potentially kill him with just 1 damage, right? So, or if they're going to tap something down, I mean. And I am considering playing this bat, and I want to take that Flood Pitch Drowner if I can. But look at this. There's a Bitter Triumph, a Cecil, and a Flood Pitch Drowner. So this is just rough, man. My opponent's got a really good start to this game. So I did decide to take the Flood Pitch Drowner because they're going to have to play Bitter Triumph on one of my bats if they're going to get one of their creatures back. So I also figured that if they use Bitter Triumph on one of my Kaitos, at least on their turn, when he doesn't have hexproof anymore, then I can just play my other one. But it's kind of tough. You know, I'm in a tough spot here. I had a somewhat decent opening hand. Well, really, I guess my opponent and I had similar opening hands. You know, we had a 1/1 flyer to start with. We had a follow-up creature. I had a bat, they had a Drowner, and 2 Kaitos, right? So similar opening hands. Drawing Flood Pitch Drowner there is actually not bad. But I'm trying to figure out what to do here. This is actually really tough. At first, I was thinking I'm just going to send Fairy Dream Thief at Kaito, and then I'm going to ninjutsu my Kaito, and then their Kaito will die. The alternative would be to send everybody a Kaito, but if they remove one of my creatures, then that Kaito is not going to die, right, with the Bitter Triumph. Also, if I send just the Fairy Dream Thief at their Kaito, then if they're able to read what I'm doing, they can Bitter Triumph my Fairy Dream Thief before I can ninjutsu. So I'm in a tough spot, right? That they actually have really good tools to deal with what I'm going to do here. And even if I ninjutsu in my Kaito, he's probably just going to die, right? Because they can ninjutsu in their Kaito and attack mine, right? With even if I tap something down, I tap down their Cecil, that doesn't matter. The Siren will kill him. If I plus him up, he'll die to their Kaito. So really, this is actually a tough spot for me. And then I won't be able to ninjutsu on my next Kaito because I won't have an unblocked creature. I can do it with the bats, but that's less than ideal, right? Because then I might not be able to replay them if I don't get a 5th land. I decided to go for this to see maybe they don't read it, right? Maybe they don't read what I'm doing, and I can ninjutsu in my Kaito and then kill their Kaito. The problem is that then they can ninjutsu in their Kaito, and then they're going to have a Kaito and I'm not. And I'm not going to be able to ninjutsu in my second one. So really, I'm kind of just behind on this game. You know, I do still think that this is a decent decision here to do this. But no matter what, I'm kind of just behind, no matter what I decide to do. So now, even if I plus Kaito up, they can ninjutsu in their Kaito. I am still considering doing that though, because it kind of forces them to do that. in retrospect, I think it could have potentially been better value to just play the zero ability, just activate the zero ability, right? And then at least draw a card off of my Kaito before it dies. Because this isn't really, you know, I get some value in that my next Kaito is going to be buffed from the emblem and the Soulstone Sanctuary is going to be buffed from the emblem too. But I think maybe the zero ability might have been better to do there. So they're going to ninjutsu in their Kaito, kill mine, and unless I get a 5th land, you know, and they play the Spyglass Siren anyway, so they're just going to block my bats. So I can't ninjutsu in my Kaito. I can cast it, but that might not really do much, right? The drawing Shoot the Sheriff there actually wasn't a bad draw, though. Only having 4 lands is a bit of an issue. I can wait for Cecil to flip and then kill him with Shoot the Sheriff. I can tap something down with Flood Pitch Drowner, so I can tap down one of their Spyglass Sirens. I can also just remove something with Strategic Betrayal. But honestly, if you look at this, none of my options are really that good. I could potentially play my other Kaito, but they'll just kill him, right? Because they can just send everything at that at Kaito, and then I'm not gonna block with the bat because they get their Flood Pitch Drowner back. So I'm in a really tough spot. I think that what partially just put me on the back foot here really was just being on the draw. My opponent had a pretty decent start with the Siren, the Kaito, the Flood Pitch Drowner, right? All that stuff. Even though I had a decent hand to start with as well, but they were able to ninjutsu in their Kaito, and that was pretty much it. So I am at least gonna hold up the Flood Pitch Drowner here. I can tap down. I'm actually considering tapping down the Spyglass Siren because then my bat can attack. I don't really care about tapping down Cecil because I can just kill him with Shoot the Sheriff after he does damage, and then my opponent takes 2 more damage, right? So here we go. Going to combat, I can tap down their Siren, but I'm not gonna block anything here. There's an Enduring Curiosity, so this is really rough, right? I'm just way behind now. Cecil flips. That's actually to my benefit that they're using the map token on Cecil because I'm gonna remove him. We Shoot the Sheriff. But no matter how you spin it, this is not looking that good, right? I'm gonna have to chump block next turn probably. This is just rough. I drew a Restless Reef. But you see the problem here? I only have 1 black source. So since I only have 1 black source, all I can do is remove Cecil, and then I can't play Fairy Dream Thief. And I was like, well, I can still attack, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm just dead, right? Because they can activate the Restless Reef, or they can just play Shoot the Sheriff on my Drowner, right? Even if I didn't attack with the bat, if they had 1 more land, then they would still win the game, right? But either way, I shouldn't have attacked, but the game was pretty much over anyway at that point. So against Dimir Midrange, Fabulum Trick is a really good sideboard because it blocks their bats. It potentially blocks their Sirens as well. And I am considering cutting a Kaito here in the mirror match because it's less likely that my creatures are going to be unblocked. Putting in Karsi Revenant is really good. That's pretty much why this card is in the sideboard. It's an excellent blocker against the Flyers. Fairy Dream Thief is not that good because it will not get in for damage, pretty much. It is nice to be able to surveil, but the main reason why Fairy Dream Thief is in this deck is to get in for chip damage, and it will not be able to do that against Dimir Midrange with so many Flyers, right? So, same thing with Malcolm. Malcolm will not be able to attack past a Deep Cavern Bat. Putting in Spectral Interference makes sense. Putting in 2 copies of Duress, putting in a Null for Enduring Curiosity, all of these things make sense. And then Nowhere to Run just to remove the smaller creatures, also remove Curiosity, and then it also takes away the Hexproof for Kaito, right? So pretty straightforward sideboard. It's pretty much exactly what I explained in the deck tech. You know, these are all the things that I sideboard in during the mirror match. This opening hand is pretty good. Starting with a Spyglass Siren. My opponent plays a tapped Watery Grave. And I was actually debating doing the same thing for a second, but I decided, you know what, let me just hold up mana here. So I was mostly holding up mana for a Deep Cavern Bat, but they didn't play anything. So it was a bit of a waste of a turn. It would have been better there to play the tapped Watery Grave. Now I'm going to have to play it untapped because I need to hold up Tidebinder, right? No Floodpitch Drowner yet. You can get in with Spyglass Siren. And then I'm just going to pass the turn. And now they play a Floodpitch Drowner. So I am going to play the Tidebinder in response to this because I'm already slightly ahead. This marginal advantage that I have here, you know, having a Spyglass Siren that can get in for damage, I want to try to maintain that. And I do still have a Shoot the Sheriff and a Floodpitch Drowner to respond to what my opponent's going to do. And I can just, I don't mind blocking this Floodpitch Drowner with the Tidebinder if it attacks because I already did what I was going to do with it. They play a Duress, so there goes my Shoot the Sheriff, unfortunately. And then they play a Deep Cavern Bat, so now there goes my Floodpitch Drowner. So they had 2 answers to my stuff. And in retrospect, you know, there is an argument to be made that I saved the Tidebinder for a Deep Cavern Bat instead. But I do think that keeping up that tempo with not having my opponent tap down my Siren was an important aspect there. Unfortunately, I'm just kind of drawing lands here. So now, seemingly, my opponent could play this Enduring Curiosity, but I have 2 blockers, so that's obviously why I didn't attack. And even if that map token had hit a non-land card, I still wouldn't have attacked because I wanted to leave up the blockers with them having 2 Curiosities in hand. Now, drawing a Kaito makes this extremely interesting because I can't ninjutsu him, but I can hardcast him. If I hardcast him, I can tap down the Floodpitch Drowner. And then my opponent still can't get in for damage with the Enduring Curiosity because Tidebinder can block the Curiosity, Siren can block the Bat. That's what I'm thinking of doing. I'm thinking of tapping down that Floodpitch Drowner. The alternative is to tap down the Bat, which I think there's an argument to be made for that too. And then the Siren can block the Floodpitch Drowner. But it felt, with the Drowner having Vigilance, it felt a little bit better to tap down the Drowner because it will never be tapped otherwise. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stun. I'm just hoping that they don't have a counter spell, and they do not. I'm going to tap down that Drowner. And now if they play Curiosity, then I can still block. And then I can also attack on my next turn. My opponent's going to attack me, so I'm certainly going to block both of these. Attacking Kaito and attacking me directly with the Bat. I did, stop for a second to think, do I really need to block this Bat, right? But it seemed like, yes, I get my Floodpitch Drowner back. But obviously, now I don't have anything to attack with. But it felt worth it, just trade with the Bat, get back my Floodpitch Drowner, right? I can tap down their new Curiosity if they play that. And actually, you know what? I think really my opponent attacking there with both of those creatures was a bit of a mistake. They play their own Kaito. So now, if they plus him up, I can't kill him with my Kaito. And they do plus him up. So now my Kaito will unfortunately not remove their Kaito because he will not do enough damage. But I drew a Cecil, right? Cecil's a really good draw because now I can block their Kaito. And I can, if I attack their Kaito directly, he's going to take at least 3 damage. Right, I'm considering plussing up my Kaito though, so then he'll take 4 damage. He won't be able to cast a stun counter on my Cecil. So Cecil is just a death touch blocker for their Kaito where he can't get through. And then if they play Curiosity, I can just tap down the Curiosity with Floodpitch Drowner. Now I can play Cecil and hold up Floodpitch Drowner. I'm telling you, man, Kaito is the X factor in this deck. Even though Curiosity is overall a stronger, and you could even argue better card, Kaito is the thing that just swings these games in your favor, Because look, my opponent's Kaito can't really do anything right now, whereas mine can, right? Mine can do stuff. So my opponent's going to wait to play this Curiosity. And, you know, I can attack with my Kaito, right? And then if they play Curiosity in response, I can tap it down with Floodpitch Drowner before blockers. So seemingly, I'm going to remove their Kaito, and then I'm going to get in for some damage here. I drew a Soulstone Sanctuary, which actually isn't too bad. And, you know, seeing that, it's like, well, I have 2 emblems now with Kaito. So this Sanctuary is actually going to hit for 5 whenever I animate it. So get in with the team here, attack Kaito. I decided to attack with both just in case, but it really wasn't necessary there. I could have just attacked with one of them and then used the other to attack my opponent directly. So that was a bit of a mistake. I should have just sent the Cecil at their Kaito and then my Kaito at their life total directly. So a missed opportunity there for 5 additional damage. It's actually a pretty significant mistake. So they attack with their Floodpitch Drowner for some reason. I can activate my Soulstone Sanctuary, which is a 5/5. And I'm wondering, like, what do they have here? They have to have something. So nothing yet. Nothing at all. So I was a little bit confused by that. You know, it's maybe they didn't realize that I had it. Or the other thing, it could be Shoot the Sheriff, right? Because sometimes you make the mistake of trying to shoot the Sheriff the Soulstone Sanctuary, but Soulstone Sanctuary is all creature types, so it is an outlaw. And now I'm thinking I can get in for a lot of damage here, right? So I drew another land, unfortunately. I'm getting a little bit flooded to this game, actually. And I'm wondering if I should plus Kaito up because it's going to be 2 more additional damage with the Sanctuary and him. Or should I just attack and then play the 0, activate the 0 ability? Seemingly my opponent also has something in their hand. Get in with the team. And nothing from my opponent. So that's very surprising. And I'm going to use Kaito's 0 ability here. And in response, they play a Tidebinder. So that's what they were holding. So that was a good play for my opponent. Turns off my Kaito, stops the hexproof, right, and all the other things. And now what I'm going to do is actually shock in this Multiversal Passage, because then when Cecil does damage next turn, he's going to flip. So my opponents have 5 life, and I have a decent board, but I'm not out of the woods yet. You know, I have a Kaito that's turned off. They play a Floodpitch Drowner. They're going to tap down my Soulstone Sanctuary. My opponent's going to attack with just Curiosity, and I'm going to block because I don't want to lose my Kaito. Even though Kaito is turned off, you know, if I draw a removal spell for Tidebinder, then he's turned back on. So I didn't draw a removal spell. But I can still attack with him, right? And actually what I can do here is attack with both Cecil and Kaito. And my opponent is certainly going to have to block the Kaito because that's lethal damage. So if they block if they block both, if Tidebinder goes away, then I can activate Kaito again. And it's tempting to do that, right? Because Cecil's going to flip, right? See, I'm putting my opponent in a tough spot here. So Cecil's going to flip if they don't block. So now they have to block, but now I can activate Kaito again, right? I can tap down the Enduring Curiosity. I'm telling you, this stun ability on Kaito is so strong. People do not use it to the full extent that they should. My opponent plays a deep counter. That's why I didn't play the land, obviously, because I wanted to bluff that I had something in my hand, and I have nothing. So now, seemingly, I have lethal here. I drew a lot of lands this game, right? I got a little bit flooded, but seemingly I have lethal. I'm just, like, you know, apprehensive. So my opponent was very gracious and just conceding because I wasn't sure if they had something in their hand or not. So, you know, I appreciate that. You know, look, the game wasn't over, right? And I'm like thinking, oh man, what do I do, right? Because they could play another Drowner or tap down my Soulstone or whatever. So that game was really interesting, right? But again, Kaito just coming in with the stuns and everything. That ability is so friggin' strong. Back to sideboarding here, and I'm not really thinking of changing anything. The only thing that I am considering is putting the Dream Thieves back in. Putting the Dream Thieves back in against Dimir Midrange on the draw is actually sometimes a good thing to do because it's a blocker. Right? You use Fairy Dream Thief as a blocker for the Spyglass Siren, for the Deep Cavern Bat. And if Fairy Dream Thief dies, then you can just draw a card off it later. You know, it potentially trades with one of those creatures. It can also trade with a Floodpitch Drowner, right? So that's what I'm considering here. Do I want to put the Dream Thieves back in? I'm thinking no, because, you know, obviously I I sideboarded very intentionally here, and I can't really make the room for it. It kind of does depend a little bit on what the Dimir midrange build is. The one little change that I am going to make, this was actually a mistake that I made. I put in the Spectral Interference instead of the Essence Scatter. I actually did mean to put in the Essence Scatter, so... But it does depend a little bit on the build that you're going up against, if you put in the Fairy Dream Thieves or not on defense. But in this particular case, I decided not to. I decided to just try to run with what I have. This opening hand is actually really not that good, but I do have 2 decent answers, right? I had two decent answers. I mean, look, starting with a Tragic Trajectory is not a bad thing if your opponent plays a Spyglass Siren, and then I have a Deep Cavern Bat to follow up. So it was actually not that bad of an opening hand, even though I have 5 lands. Unfortunately, my opponent started with a Duress, and then I lost the Tragic Trajectory, and I drew another land off the top, so I have 6 lands already. So not the best start for me here. Now look at this hand. This hand is loaded, right? The good news is that they don't have cheap creatures. So if I take this Tiebinder, then all of a sudden they don't really have that much they can do, right? They just have these 2 Kaitos in their hand. And then the counterspell. The counterspell I can certainly work around. And look at that. They have their own Deep Cavern Bat. So there goes my Spyglass Siren. So a good top deck from the opponent. But... obviously this is a stalemate here. I'm debating if I should attack or not. I'm thinking probably not, because the Tiebinder is more valuable than the Spyglass Siren, right? So if I attack, then it's favorable, right? It's favorable for my opponent. And unfortunately with this Curiosity, that's not going to help that much, because it's just going to get countered with the Phantom Interference. Now also, I have an interesting choice here to block, because if I don't block, they can ninjutsu in one of these Kaitos. So I decided not to block, but now they're going to ninjutsu in the Kaito. And then, I mean, sure, I can attack it, but I can't kill it this turn. So I think my opponent should have actually done the plus up here, though, instead of doing the Surveil and draw a card. So I drew a Flood Pitch Drowner. Flood Pitch Drowner is good. So now I can play the Siren, I can activate the map token, and I can hold up Flood Pitch Drowner. But yeah, that was a really good start by my opponent, right? I had a keepable but not great opening hand, and they took away one of my removal spells. I drew a land. The good news is that I've drawn creatures the last few turns. I'm also debating playing the Curiosity. I'm debating attacking my opponent directly and playing the Curiosity, because the Curiosity can potentially force my opponent to use the stun on Kaito. Then he gets a little bit weaker. And then the turn after that, I can play the Spyglass Siren and then play the map token, buff up the bat, and then play the Drowner, right? That's all the things that I was planning through my head on that moment there where I paused, which is that by doing this, my opponent's probably going to stun the Curiosity with the Kaito. Then my opponent will play something. If they take my Spyglass Siren with the bat, then I can tap down the bat, play my own bat, and then attack Kaito directly. If they don't take the Siren, they take my bat or whatever, then I can play the Siren, activate the map token on my bat that's already on the field, and then tap down their bat, right? So they did take the bat. I think this is actually almost more favorable for me, but either way, you know, this really isn't too bad. I can potentially remove their Kaito right now. And I drew a Nowhere to Run. So, activating the map token. I just hit a land. So now I'm thinking of using Nowhere to Run instead, because they're just going to block. If I get rid of their bat, then I can attack their Kaito directly. Their Kaito goes down to 1 loyalty, and then either Spyglass Siren or my bat will get the job done next turn. And I have Flood Pitch Drowner to tap down a potential flyer if they play that. So actually, I think I'm navigating this pretty well, right? Even though my opponent got off to a pretty strong start. My opponent shocks in a Watery Grave, and my opponent's going to attack me. I'm not going to block. I do need to be careful with this Cecil because he's about to flip. I drew a Tragic Trajectory. This is actually really good because if I attack their Kaito directly, their Kaito is going to get removed, and then I can play Tragic Trajectory to remove their Cecil. This is an excellent, excellent draw. So first, I want to start with the bat first because I want to see what's going on. They play their own Enduring Curiosity. So now they're tapped out at least. I don't have to worry about that counterspell. So they have 2 counterspells and a Spyglass Siren. So I'm going to take that Spyglass Siren for sure because that's one thing that's going to stand in my way, right? So I'm going to attack their Kaito directly with one of my creatures, and then the other creature will attack them directly. I'm going to draw a card, and then I'm going to play the Tragic Trajectory. And not only that, I can tap down their Curiosity with my Floodpitch Drowner. So this is a massive turn for me, right? Massive turn. All right, they're tapped out. They can't play a counterspell right now, so I'm going to tap down that Curiosity. Look at this huge board that I have. And that's it. They scoop. So despite my opponent's strong start, I was able to carefully navigate my way through and come out with the win. This was a very cool matchup, a very cool mirror matchup. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the third match. That is absolutely bad. Just a Drowner and a counterspell is not going to work. This opening hand is much more functional, and it's not really necessary to keep both 1-drops, right? A Cecil and a Spyglass Siren. I can just start with a Siren, then I have a bat and a removal spell. It's not such a bad start. Unfortunately, I do have to shock myself here, and seemingly have to shock myself twice. So this is potentially some kind of Boros deck. It could also be Mardu. It could be Jeskai Control, but Jeskai Control doesn't really run too many inspiring advantages. So I'm going to start with the bat and see what I'm dealing with. Boros tokens. So this is scary because look at this. Look at this hand. It's loaded, right? You got Enduring Curiosity, Delny, Get Lost, Voice of Victory, right? I'm certainly going to take the Get Lost because I can at least remove the Voice of Victory with the Bitter Triumph. But man, that hand is kind of crazy, isn't it? Here comes Voice of Victory. And I drew a basic land, which is good. So I'm thinking of just discarding this Multiversal Passage. You could argue that it's better to save that land and take the 3 life, but I didn't want to. You know, this deck can potentially start popping off and hit me for a lot of damage, so I'm going to use a map token. There's a Floodpitch Drowner on top, which is not bad. I did get rid of the Voice of Victory, so hopefully I can play Floodpitch Drowner on my opponent's turn, as well as Tidebinder. Get in with the 2 flyers. So I'm thinking of using Tidebinder to counter the Enduring Innocence trigger, but there'll be 2 triggers with Delny coming down. So I could also potentially counter Delny, but it seemed better to just turn off the Innocence, right? It will turn off the lifelink as well. So my opponent did not play the Delny yet, which was actually smart. So now I'm actually wondering if I should tap down this Enduring Innocence. I was thinking maybe because if they do play a Delny, then I can attack into it with the Drowner. And this obviously prevents them from gaining 2 life. They play another Enduring Innocence. So, and I drew another Floodpitch Drowner. So, I mean, I can play this Floodpitch Drowner and tap down the other Innocence and then attack. That's kind of what I'm considering. Again, mostly just to avoid the lifelink here. But this is tough because now they're going to draw a whole bunch of cards if they play a Delny. They're going to draw 4 cards. So I'm in a really tough spot. I think there is an argument to be made that I could have saved the Tidebinder to counter the Innocence trigger when the second Innocence came down. It's also, I wanted them to not gain the life, right, and get in for damage with the Drowners. With them playing a Bastronaut, though, and now they have a 3rd land, so they can play a Delny. They actually don't. They play another Innocence. So this is just rough, right? I'm just like, I don't really know what I'm going to do now. They can gain so much life off this, and I'm just not going to do enough damage, right? So I think it might have been the better play to play the Tidebinder and counter the Enduring Innocence trigger. It would not have mattered because they played 2 more Innocence anyway, and those aren't going to be countered, right? But I think that might have been the better line. What I'm thinking of doing here is actually playing Shoot the Sheriff on the Innocents, and then holding back the Flood Pitch Drowners to block the other 2 Enduring Innocences. And then at least the Lifelinkers will be gone, right? That seems like my best way out because I can't leave these on the field. And if I just attack with the Flood Pitch Drowner, then they're going to block with the Bastronaut, and then I don't have a good blocker for the Enduring Innocence. So at least if I block with the Flood Pitch Drowners, then once the Enduring Innocences are gone, they won't have a Lifelinker anymore. So that's kind of what I'm considering here. But I'm way behind, right? Even though my opponent's at 4 life, I'm way behind. There's Arabella. Definitely scary. Lots of triggers here. I'm obviously considering using the Tie Binder to counter the Arabella trigger next turn. Here comes Delny, which is not so bad, you know, because they already got the Enduring Innocence trigger, so that doesn't happen here. But they drew 3 cards anyway, right? It doesn't really make much of a difference. So getting in with the Innocences, I can at least block 2 of them, get them off the field, and then shoot the Sheriff the other one. My opponent's going to gain 4 life off this. And I drew a Spyglass Siren, which is not good. Can still get in with the team, and then I can counter the trigger with Tie Binder off of Arabella. Burnout Bastronaut comes down. Drawing lots of cards. Voice of Victory, so I mean that's pretty much the game, right? Because now I can't play Tie Binder in response, so nothing I can do. Arabella is going to attack. My opponent's going to gain a whole bunch of life. I'm going to lose life, and at that point, there's just no way. There's just no way that I could come back. I need 2 removal spells, right? 1 for Voice of Victory, 1 for Arabella. So against this deck, Intimidation Tactics does seem pretty good. But this is a bit of a tough matchup. You know, I'm not really too sure what to do. I am considering cutting 1 Kaito because my opponent plays a lot of creatures, and it's unlikely that I might be able to get in for damage. And even so, you know, aside from that, it's likely that Kaito will just die, right? Because my opponent will be able to attack him back. Cutting a Malcolm here, I don't think that's fully necessary, but I wanted to make space for some more removal. That's why I did that. So cutting a Malcolm, and I cut the 2 Phantom Interferences because so many of their spells are cheap. So they're probably just going to be able to pay that 2, right? That 2 cost. So that doesn't really make much sense to do. And putting in a Nowhere to Run does seem better. It hits Arabella. It hits Voice of Victory. I think Nowhere to Run's a good choice. And I also think this, Carsey Revenant, is a good choice because it blocks a lot of their creatures without dying, and it's also a lifelinker, right? The Boros Tokens deck is a little bit aggressive, so that's a way that I can potentially get some of my life back. So this feels like a good sideboard. You know, putting in counter spells against a Voice of Victory deck, questionable, right? Because 1 Voice of Victory, and now all of a sudden your counter spells are turned off. So this opening hand is pretty good. Hopefully I can find some lands, but it is good. Got an Intimidation Tactics, and then got another Intimidation Tactics, and a Flood Pitch Drowner. And my opponent's opening hand is not that good, right? Just a Split Up, an Enduring Innocence, and then a whole bunch of lands. So going to be a slow start for my opponent. I drew a Tragic Trajectory, which is not bad. And I am debating shocking this Multiversal Passage in. It doesn't seem worth it to play the Intimidation Tactics again because it's unlikely that it'll hit anything. Obviously, that other card could be a creature, but it's unlikely. And even if it is, it may not be something so dangerous, right? It's better to wait until my opponent has some more cards in hand. But one of the ones is Get Lost, so wasting a Get Lost on my Flood Pitch Drowner, by all means, I don't care, right? And this is great. I drew a Fairy Dream Thief. So now I can see what's on top. It's a Spyglass Siren, which I am going to bin because I want to really make sure that I get the land. Now I can crap the map token and see if I get the land. And I did, And now I can crack the next map token as well. See, this is the value that Fairy Dream Thief brings, man. It's these map tokens, like whether it's your, and now I can just surveil this one away and I can draw a card off that one. And I can draw a card off that one. It's in my graveyard. So really, Fairy Dream Thief just brings so much value to this deck. The surveilling, when you have map tokens, look, and they split up, so now I can use that one to draw a card, right? This is just so much value, so much value. Unfortunately, I do not have a land here, but I'm going to, it seems like a safe time to do the Dream Thief, right? My opponent has 3 lands in hand and 1 unknown card. Maybe I get the 4th land if I do that, and I did, right? So much value from Fairy Dream Thief. So my opponent plays a Fountain Port and nothing else, and I drew a 5th land. So now I have some real options. Seemingly holding up mana for Enduring Curiosity is not a very good idea because they can block with a Fountain Port Fish, right? They can potentially play something. So really what I'm thinking of doing here is actually using Tidebinder to counter the Fountain Port trigger, right? First thing I'm going to do is find out what those 2 unknown cards are. It seems like an okay time to do this. And there's a Sharpshooter and another land. So this is great, right? I'm hitting my opponent's creatures. And I'm actually not going to hold up mana for Curiosity. I'm going to hold up mana for Tidebinder because seemingly they're going to activate the Fountain Ports. I can counter it with the Tidebinder. They won't get a fish. They can make a fish on their turn again or when I go and attack. But by that point, I can play Nowhere to Run to remove it, right? That's why I did all that. So now I can remove whatever fish token comes down with Nowhere to Run and still draw a card. And look, they played a Delny anyway, so I can just remove that, and then I can play Enduring Curiosity, right? I'm going to draw a card off this. So I'm just way ahead in tempo now, and my opponent just scoops at that point. Now, obviously, it's a very preemptive scoop from my opponent. They could have at least played it out, but that I had a huge advantage there, right? Good sideboarding with the Intimidation tactics, great value off of the Fairy Dream Thief. And a good usage of the Tidebinder to counter the Fountain Port trigger, or to counter the Fountain Port activation, I should say. So, all that being said, trying to figure out if there's anything I want to change here. I'm thinking no, because again, counter spells are not good against a deck that runs 4 copies of Voice of Victory, right? I was debating putting in this Fabloom trick, because if I tap down a creature, like I tap down an Arabella, that could be good, and then having 2 more flyers, because their deck doesn't play that many flyers. Sharpshooter does have reach, right? But aside from that, I'm also debating putting in a null for War Leader's Call and Enduring Innocence. But again, playing counterspells into Voice of Victory is questionable, right? So, and even, you know, I'm really debating putting in this Fabloom trick, but playing any of these instant spells that you have to play on your opponent's turn is questionable when your opponent plays 4 Voice of Victories. So I decided to just stick to what I have, right? If it wasn't for Voice of Victory, a null would be a perfect sideboard card, right, against this deck. Here's my opening hand for the 3rd game. This is very, very questionable. I have an Intimidation Tactics, which is a great spell to use against their deck. But I have no creatures and 2 Kaitos. This is potentially awful. The thing is, though, if I draw just 1 or 2 creatures, this opening hand is actually great. So I decided to just take it's risky. This was a very risky keep. In fact, I honestly can't advise that this is a good keep. It probably just straight up better to mulligan. But I had this feeling in my gut that it was okay to keep this hand. Now, drawing a Gulumik Verge off the top as a 5th land, that is certainly leaves much to be desired. My opponent has 2 Voice of Victories in hand. I get rid of one of them. Like, it's not a good start. So I might pay for this, right? I might pay for this. But look, if I can find 1 or 2 creatures, this opening hand is actually good. Unfortunately, I'm not finding anything, right? I'm just drawing lands. So I'm just thinking, man, I just screwed up. All right, I just screwed up. I should have mulliganed. And honestly, you know, for those of you watching, I think it's better to just mulligan that hand. I don't think it was wise to keep this. I just had a feeling, right? I just had a feeling, and I was thinking that, look, I have Kaito, which is a really good card. I have an Intimidation Tactics. If I can just get a Deep Cavern Bat, or if I can just get a Spyglass Siren Bat, I can get something going. Unfortunately, I didn't. The only creature I got was an Enduring Curiosity. So I wanted to put stops on my opponent's turn to bluff having a spell. But then as soon as my opponent's turn started, I realized that's stupid. They have a Voice of Victory. They know I don't have anything. So that was dumb. I can't play anything, right? So there's no point in putting the stops, right? They know I'm bluffing. So that was silly. So I'm in a bad spot. You know, I got 11 life. Thankfully, my opponent hasn't expanded their board at all, so they might not have anything too scary in their hand either. I drew a Cecil. So now I have something that I can do. I can play a Cecil. I can play a Curiosity. Here's the thing. If I play Cecil, it can block Voice of Victory, right? That seems good. If they have Sheltered by Ghosts, obviously that's not good, right? But it's so inefficient with my mana to do that. I can play Curiosity, but that doesn't really do anything other than just give me a blocker. So I'm actually going to do something a little bit, what might seem a little reckless, right? And a little bit brash. I'm going to play one of these Kaitos because I'm going to tap down the Voice of Victory. That Voice of Victory is 3 damage a turn. So I just took that away for 2 turns. Now my opponent can attack the Kaito with the Nesting Bot, but that prevents 2 damage from going to me. And I have another Kaito in my hand anyway. And then next turn I can play Enduring Curiosity and Cecil. So it seems crazy, right? But by tapping down that Voice of Victory, it prevents the damage from getting to me. So it might have seemed like it was a bit of a waste, but I don't think so. You know, I get to tap down my opponent's best creature that they had. They can't do damage to me. They have to take the time to attack my Kaito. I would have taken 5 damage that turn if I could have played the Enduring Curiosity and had a blocker, but still, I think that was a very good use of the Kaito. I didn't take any damage. The Voice of Victory is still tapped, and now I have an Enduring Curiosity and a Cecil on the field, right? Now my Curiosity gets removed with an Abrade, but it's still there. And look, I can attack with Cecil. Cecil will flip into the 4/4 lifelinker, and I can draw a card off it if they don't block. Unfortunately, I'm just drawing, I've drawn so many lands this game, man. But I can attack. My opponent is going to block with the Nesting Bot, but I can flip him into the lifelinker. So now I have another choice, right? Because guess what? I still have a Kaito, right? I can play this Restless Reef, obviously, but I'm thinking of tapping down that Voice of Victory again because my opponent can't kill Kaito, right? They would have to attack with the token and the Arabella, but if they attack with Arabella, then Cecil's going to block her. So again, seriously, Kaito is so valuable. The stun is so freaking good. The stun is so good, and people are so apprehensive to use it, and I don't understand why. People, I think, just... they don't recognize how much momentum. Look, I'm drawing nothing but lands, but I'm doing totally fine this game because of the 2 Kaitos. Right? Because of the 2 Kaitos, I'm actually doing fine. Now, there is an argument to be made where, like, if I had played a Preacher or something like that, right, that would be just as good because these creatures can't get through a Preacher either, right? So there is an argument to be made with that. But again, the fact that it just stuns your opponent creatures, it's so valuable, right? It is so valuable. And now look, I have a Restless Reef to block. So I'm wondering if I should attack here. I'm thinking yes, because I'm going to gain 4 life and draw some cards, depending upon how my opponent decides to block. And then I have the Restless Reef to hold back as a blocker myself. So my opponent didn't block at all. I gained 4 life, and I can draw 2 cards off this. I drew a Strategic Betrayal, and I drew another one. I've drawn so many lands this game. It's crazy how many lands I've drawn, right? Look at this. Look at how many freaking lands I have, man. So I played the basic land because I want to still have mana up for the Reef, right? That's why I did that. So I can play Strategic Betrayal. My opponent's going to get rid of the token. And now I have the Restless Reef to block. But I have the mana to be able to do it. So look at this. My opponent actually attacks. I think they might not have realized that I had enough mana to activate the Reef because I'm just going to block this Arabella. And they scooped. Right? Isn't that crazy? How many lands I drew and I still won that game? Kaito, man. It's all Kaito. It's the stun. The stun is so freaking good. So, I hope you enjoyed the gameplay featuring this new build for Dimir Midrange. I really do think that this is poised to be the new top deck in the meta. And I also feel that it's a necessary deck to have in the meta because otherwise these combo decks and these crazy powerful creature decks, they would just run us over. And the only answer that we would have would be control decks. and you would just have crazy aggro and crazy combo and control, and that's it. Now, that being said, my build here for Dimir Midrange, it's not really a Dimir Midrange build. This is slightly an aggro deck, and all of my Dimir Midrange builds have been like that. They've been slightly more aggro leaning. It's a highly interactive, somewhat aggro deck that does have the potential to be carried into the late game thanks to Kaito and Enduring Curiosity. Now, I've had a lot of builds for this deck, both in previous iterations at previous points in the meta, but also for this video. I tried a lot of different versions of this deck, and that's why I've settled on this one, and I can confidently say that this is a very strong Dimir midrange build. So let me talk about some of the other things that didn't really work. One of the creatures that I had in here for a long time that I ended up taking out is Azure Beastbinder. I think Azure Beastbinder was really important in the previous meta with Mono Red and Izzet Cauldron, because it could turn off the Cauldron, it could turn off all the other creatures, it could turn off Screaming Nemesis, it could turn off Needlehead, right? It could do all these things. But now I don't think that card is quite as necessary. And more importantly, it's a slow card. It does have evasion because it can't really be blocked, right? But it is a little bit slow. The interaction from playing a Flippage Drowner is immediate, whereas the interaction from the Azure Beastbinder, you have to wait a turn after you play it for when it attacks. Now, it's very good interaction because it turns off an opponent's thing. It can turn off an artifact, it can turn off a planeswalker, turn off a creature, right? All these things. That's great, but it does feel a little bit too slow. And not only that, it doesn't really affect the Kona decks and the Sultai Reanimator decks because those things happen the turn that your opponent plays them. You know, if your opponent plays a Kona, they're not going to like wait a turn to activate it. They're going to try to activate it that turn. Same thing with Sultai Reanimator. You know, when you use Zombify on a creature or if you use Kavero to bring back a creature, it happens immediately. So that's why I'm not running the copies of Beastbinder. I do really like Beastbinder though, and it is very powerful for sure in the Simic aggro deck because if everything gets buffed with either Innkeeper's Talent or Board or whatever, then Azure Beastbinder is just hitting for more damage and it can't be blocked. I also tried a build in which I had Intimidation Tactics in the main. I have both of them. So I didn't have the copies of Fairy Dream Thief. I instead had the copies of Intimidation Tactics. And I thought that was going to be great because, again, with all these decks trying to combo off on turn 4 or all these crazy creatures and stuff that can come down later on in the game, I thought it was going to be a perfect fit. It ended up not working as well as I thought because the bottom line is that Intimidation Tactics is not good in every single matchup. It's actually not that good in the Dimir midrange mirror because unless this is in your opening hand and your opponent has like a Curiosity or something, you're not really getting that much value from it. It's useless against control decks. It's not particularly good against Pixie decks unless they have like an Acolyte or a Zenith in hand. That's a good one to take away, right? That's a lot of value. So really, I do think it belongs in the sideboard, but this card just gets sideboarded in a lot. I had other builds where I was running 4 copies of Curiosity, 4 copies of Kaito. I had a build where I was running only 24 lands instead of 25 lands, and I really do think this is a 25 land deck. I was having some trouble getting the stuff that I wanted by turn 4 and turn 5 with only the 24 lands. So it really does feel like, even though the curve is low, it really does feel like this needs to be a 25 land deck. And I said what I said about the Curiosity and running 4 copies. I tried the build of running 4 copies of Curiosity, 3 copies of Kaito. And again, it's a good build and it lets you last long into the game and it lets you keep generating value and all this stuff. But there were just these moments where it's just like, man, I feel like I'm not making much progress here. You know, it's like turn 5 and my opponent still has 15 life or something like that. You know what I mean? I tried 3 copies of Deep Cavern Bat, 3 copies of Flippage Drowner, 3 copies of both, 2 copies of Malcolm. And that didn't really work out as well as I would think either because, again, it's so important to interact with your opponent's stuff. It's so important on turn 2 to take away their best card in their hand or their removal spell. It's so important to be able to interact with your opponent's things with the Floodpitch Drowner. So these 2 creatures in the current meta are just very, very important. That being said, Dimir Midrange is a bit of a flexible archetype. It seems like everybody's just copying the same deck list over and over and over again. I don't think you should do that. I think you should try a little bit of experimentation, find a build for Dimir Midrange that works for you. Because there is some flexibility here. You don't necessarily need 4 bats. You don't necessarily need a Malcolm. You don't necessarily need 4 Curiosities. You don't need 4 Kaitos, right? You don't need the Dream. There's so much flexibility here. You could run Preachers if you want to try that. You could run a 3rd Tie Binder if you want to try that. You could try Fableum Trigger if you want to. Right? There's so many options here. So experiment. Don't be afraid to just try some stuff out. Don't just copy a deck list, including mine, right? Don't just copy a deck list. Try some stuff out. You know, experiment a little bit. Find something that works for you. Again, I think it's absurd that Wizards did not ban something from this deck. And honestly, I think the power level in Standard is just still crazy. Even though we lost Is It Cauldron, even though Screaming Nemesis is gone and Mono Red has taken a bit of a hit, I still think the power level in this format is just crazy. It is too high, it is too powerful, and it's only going to get worse next year because none of these sets are rotating and we're getting 7 sets next year, all in Standard. So I've actually been working on something long-term, kind of a project that I'm keeping to myself that is going to address the larger issues with Standard as opposed to just banning a couple of cards. And if you're interested in contributing to that or helping me out with it, then you can join my Discord server linked in the description. That wraps this one up. It felt great to go back to a personal favorite of mine in Dimir Midrange. This deck is so strong right now, and it's a necessary thing with the crazy combos that can happen with these other kinds of decks. You know, it's necessary to have this Dimir Midrange deck to kind of keep those other things in check. But I do think it's a bit too strong. I do think that Wizards should have banned Enduring Curiosity. If you enjoyed, then drop me a like to beat the YouTube algorithm and leave me some feedback in the comments. This took a lot of work to test all the different builds, but I'm very happy with the results and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you. And lastly, if you are a fan of this kind of Magic the Gathering content that gets deep into deck building, play patterns, and other aspects of the game, then subscribe to the channel to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.